our deepest desires and our darkest fears.
The cast of Riverdale is quite divisive. Each character is either beloved by all or hated by all viewers with a burning passion. So aren't you curious to find out how your favorite character did in terms of public opinion? In this video, we'll be ranking the cast members of Riverdale and we'll reveal which ones of them are the most loved and which are the most detested. But before we go on with the list, do make sure that you leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel with notifications turned on, or else you'll miss our next exciting videos. Now let's begin by revealing the most loved cast members of Riverdale, starting with the main characters. In first place, no doubt, is Cheryl Blossom. It's literally impossible not to love Madelaine Pesch in this show, especially since she seems to be the only one who understands the acting assignment for the series. Riverdale is by no means a show we're supposed to over-intellectualize or overanalyze, because at times it's pure madness, and no one ever made that clearer than Riverdale's resident it girl and her intense over-the-top performance. The way Cheryl's relationship with Toni unfolded is quite a nice surprise. In fact, that arc might have been the best thing to happen on the show. Despite being classified as a villain, Cheryl is so much more than your standard sassy mean girl. She's actually the most complex, most entertaining character on the show. Plus, admit it, there's no one else that can pull off those one-liners with as much attitude as she did. Next up, we have Fred Andrews. Amidst the off-the-wall madness of Riverdale, at every turn, you could always count on Archie's loving dad to inject a healthy dose of humanity into the show. Out of all the characters, Fred is the least vindictive and doesn't seem to have a manipulative bone on his body, which is honestly more than we can say for everyone else. While the rest of the town held grudges against each other and just can't seem to stay out of trouble, Fred remained a wonderful parent and appeared to be like the heart or the conscience of the show. Unfortunately, Luke Perry tragically passed before the 4th season, so Fred had to be written out of the show, with what is now canonically the best ever episode of the series. Even in his absence, there's no doubt that Perry made Riverdale a better place, and the show was never quite the same without him. Now we have the third most loved character in Riverdale, none other than Jughead Jones. Jughead had some seriously questionable moments on the show, but Cole Sprouse really did something with his performance that made Jughead quite the breakout character of the show. Because of his superb, nuanced acting, Jughead becomes so much more than Archie's best friend with that iconic hat. When you just thought the show would finally fly off the handle and become an absolute freak show, Jughead's sarcasm pulls you back to a believable reality, almost like he's the voice of reason in such a mad show, and there's no one we'd rather have narrating the show. And let's be honest, Archie wouldn't have survived that long without his trusty, if just a bit too sassy sidekick. Next up, we have Skeet Ulrich's passionate portrayal of F.B. Jones. F.B. Jones might just be the most likable, obvious villain on the show, mainly because all of his terrible actions are justified, or at least relatable enough to make fans say, hey, I would have done the same if I were in the same situation. Even though his actions may not be the most ideal, at least you're reassured that everything he does to get his son out of harm's way. On top of this, FP's entire sobriety subplot is so well written that it only endeared him to more audiences. His amazing leadership of the Serpents also made it clear that FP Jones is so much more than a deadbeat dad and a criminal. He's just a guy trying to make up for his past mistakes. And then we have Betty Cooper at 5th place. In the earlier seasons, Betty Cooper was far from being a fan favorite. Her angst seemed too awkward and forced, and it was hard to relate to whatever she was trying to achieve back then. But she was able to redeem herself in later seasons, where she finally made it clear that out of all the characters, she was the one willing to throw herself into trouble's way, if it meant saving the day for everyone else. There's something inspiring about the way she always tries to do the right thing and stick up for what she believes in. And honestly, we can't ask for a better resident detective. She managed to turn Betty into a character we can totally relate to, despite the show's questionable writing always trying to make her go dark in all the most cringeworthy ways. And closing out on the list of Riverdale's most loved cast members is Camila Mendez's Veronica Lodge. Now we're really dangerously close to the hate list on this one. In fact, there may be a good number of fans who won't agree that Veronica is one of the show's most loved characters. After all, it's hard to look beyond the terrible stereotype of the mean, arrogant, rich girl attitude and her never-ending drama with her parents, but luckily the writers and Camila herself didn't rest until they came up with a three-dimensional character who turned out to be much more than Riverdale's resident mean girl. After befriending Betty, dating Archie, and directly challenging the beloved Cheryl Blossom, Veronica proved to be more than a pretty face. She's easily one of the show's most intriguing characters, and no matter how hard the plot tried tried to take her down, she just emerged stronger and more determined than ever. Now let's proceed to Riverdale's most hated leads, starting off obviously with Hiram Lodge. It seems like a life ago when Hiram was one of the show's most wonderful characters, back when he was nothing more than a figment of Veronica's stories. His mysterious backstory had fans on the edge of their seats waiting for him to show up on screen. But when he finally did, it seemed he was nothing more than a one-dimensional, unengaging villain who was never given the time to grow or develop. Mark Consuelos did give the character his best shot, but there's really only so much he could have done with such a terribly written role. And then we have Hermione Lodge, another one-dimensional villain. There's something unnatural about Riverdale's writing, forcing Hermione to switch between being a mother and a criminal with hardly any motivation or room to breathe. Every time she appears to have a good moment, like when she genuinely tries to be a good mother to Veronica, she's pulled back to being a villain without a cause. And then we have Kevin Keller, whom we almost actually loved. Almost. Instead of being a character we can support or actually root for, Kevin Keller turned out to be nothing more than a plot device, only getting called on screen when things were getting too boring, only to provide an obstacle that would cause other characters around him to develop, with nary any consideration to the growth of his character. He's severely underused and underdeveloped, so even though it seems like he's a sweet guy you can actually like, he simply makes eye rolls whenever he shows up because the audience already knows he's just there to move someone else's narrative forward. Next up, Reggie Mantle. Just like Kevin Keller, Reggie seems severely underutilized in the series, often disappearing for long periods of time until the writers decide it's time to mix things up. Overall, Reggie's character is largely forgettable, no matter the potential shown by Charles Melton. And then of course we have Archie Andrews, the show's main protagonist, ending up as one of Riverdale's most hated characters. Okay, it's not that Archie is a bad character. Katie Appa's acting actually made the guy relatable with his loyalty, kindness, selfless nature, but it's just so hard to continue rooting for someone whose character development is largely overshadowed by the rest of the cast. It's obvious that the writers had a hard time writing Archie into existence. Though obviously kind-hearted, Archie's constant mistakes, nonsensical decisions, and weird actions constantly threaten to alien him from the audience. He reminds you of a young Harry Potter whose only redeeming quality is being the show's popular character. It's really the people around him who do the heavy lifting, but he still somehow got all the credit, which could be downright annoying for many people. Sorry, I had to say it. Now let's talk about the special mentions, aka Riverdale's most loved and hated supporting characters. Let's start with side characters everyone loved. First, of course, is Jellybean Jones. Audiences expected a lot from Jellybean's character, and she didn't disappoint. The Doc Martens wearing slingshot wielding baby mechanic is just a breath of fresh air throughout the show. Then we have Pop Tate. 4 words: your faves can never. And then of course we have Joaquin DeSantos. This guy deserved the world. Ever since he got on that bus to San Junipero, our lives were never the same. When his character came back in season 3, we were all ready to give everything up to see him and Kevin run away to live happily ever after. But instead we saw Joaquin lifeless on the couch, blue-lipped from an attack from the Griffins and gargoyles, and we still want justice. Now on to the worst side characters ever, starting off with Penelope Blossom. Cheryl's terrible mother obviously takes the cake here. Every time she's on screen, you just want to pull out the guillotine from the basement and let her have it. The fact that she targeted and killed innocent people in her quest proves how evil and callous Penelope can be. She cemented her place as the show's villain when she poisoned Betty and Veronica in the season 3 finale. Damn you, Penelope. And finally, we have Sheik, the one who started out super suspicious but worked hard to gain everyone's trust, only to make a complete 180 and prove that fans were right to doubt his intentions all along. We still haven't moved on from such a betrayal, TBH. And that ends our list of Riverdale's most loved and hated characters. So tell us, how did your fave do?